Hey guys, what's up? It's Biscuit with Horror Reviews. I'm here with a review of a low-budget horror film from director Scott Schimmer. This is the guy who directed the rather low-budget and, to be completely honest, not very well-acted horror drama film from 2009, Found, which this is a movie I actually it's actually a movie I like quite a bit. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn disturbing and uncomfortable. He went on to direct the kind of immensely different, and it's also a film that I only saw just a few days ago. The very different kind of pseudo slasher film Plank Face, which is not what you would expect it to be at all, based on what you've heard about it or what you have read about it or just the plot and poster. It's very different, and that's something I really dig about it. I'm talking about his newest movie, The Bad Man. This is a movie that I've been interested in seeing ever since it was announced a very long time ago, many years ago. I want to say, like, it was probably announced in 2016-ish. I want to say about 2016, maybe 2017. This movie has been in the works for quite a bit. Only just recently have I heard about it hitting any form of streaming or anything like that. You can digitally purchase the film off of the director's website for $5, which is what I did because I really wanted to check this one out. So now that it's finally out and available to the public, I wanted to kind of talk about it. Essentially, this is a film about a couple who are they're at this bed and breakfast that the wife, Mary, her aunt, like I think it was like her aunt or her great grandmother, somebody like that, her grandmother, somebody like that, who owned and ran this bed and breakfast. Died, and when somebody shows up who says they had a reservation there, they let the guy stay there because, you know, there isn't any place nearby, and he just seems like an alright kind of guy. This guy turns out to be a sadistic clown who proceeds to hold them captive in the house and torture and train them into being sex slaves he will then sell them in a human auction. Yeah, that took quite a turn, didn't it? First thing I want to talk about is the main villain of the film, the clown, Lawrence. He's portrayed by, and I apologize if I mispronounced this last name. He is portrayed by Arthur, I think it's Cullenfer, who directed the slasher film. Let me find it on my shelf here. Slasher film Headless, which is this is the copy I have that is signed by him and I think a couple other people. Either way, it's an autographed copy of Headless that I have. And Headless is a movie from about 3-ish years ago. Not 3 years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago. No, 4 years ago, from 2015. That is one of the most disgusting, horrific, disturbing, stomach-churning slasher films I've seen in a very long time. And it's a movie that I actually like quite a bit, in all honesty. He is the clown, and he does a pretty damn good job at being both immensely creepy and entertaining and kind of funny. There's this entire scene where they're eating breakfast, and he's talking about how much he loves pancakes and shit like that. And I want to believe that this was done like with intention, with the intent of being a legitimately kind of funny, almost absurd scene. But at the same time, it almost feels like the dialogue was written to be kind of just purposely uncomfortable and out of place. I don't really know how to put it, but it feels like a very absurd, humorous scene, and it is. It is legitimately a pretty funny scene. Also featured in the cast for this film is Dave Parker, also known as Mr. Parka. He is a horror critic on YouTube, like myself. He's a very cool guy. He also had a part in Headless as the main character's boyfriend. I remember that. He was also in the previous Scott Shimmer film, Plank Face. He had a small part in that one, but I occasionally see Dave pop up in some movies, and he's usually it's usually pretty interesting to see the kind of performances he gives. In this one, it's definitely interesting, considering that the performance he gives in this movie is a completely silent performance of him walking around, crouching and crawling around for most of the movie, shirtless and in a gas mask. It's quite interesting to see, to be completely honest. This movie has been getting a lot of intensely negative attention and reviews and ratings. For some reason, people really seem to hate this movie. And don't get me wrong, this movie isn't, the greatest movie ever. This isn't Citizen Kane. But this is not that bad of a movie, like, at all. And one of the very big complaints I often see in negative reviews of this movie is the acting. And to be honest, it's not the worst. It's far from the worst acting I've ever seen. It isn't necessarily well acted, but it's not god-awful. From the technical standpoint, the movie is pretty cheaply made and cheap-looking, but again, it's far from god-awful. As somebody who has seen a fair share of micro-budget, shot-on-video, low-budget, independent, garbage horror films, this is nowhere near as some of the worst I've ever seen. And if you have seen a bunch of movies of that kind of caliber, then you might watch this movie and might not think it's that bad either, honestly. I feel like this is a movie that, anybody who's well versed in indie horror and low budget horror will be pleasantly surprised by some of the more shining qualities of the production. Shit, I'm trying to look at my notes here that are just slightly off screen. Fuck. The characters in the film aren't too fleshed out, but you guys know me. I don't care too much. The concept of the film is pretty uncomfortable, and some of the scenes related to the sex slavery stuff is pretty damn unnerving, even if the acting isn't too great in some of those scenes. Maybe somehow I've become a bit softer after exposing myself to so much horrific shit over the years as somebody who is a connoisseur of extreme and weird, bad horror cinema. But, in all honesty, there's some pretty damn uncomfortable moments in the film. And, sometimes, I'm not trying to sound like a badass here, but I think I'm somebody who's kind of desensitized and hard to, make uncomfortable with movies, at least most of the time. And this movie does that, so, there's that. There are some times in the film, this is just something I noticed, where things aren't in frame, like, at all. And I don't really know why. Maybe, like, they wanted to show a specific thing in the shot. I don't know. That doesn't sound like a valid reason, but maybe that's why. The pacing in the movie is fine. I would say it's almost never really boring. Again, if you are into these kinds of, independent low-budget films, this movie is far from boring or bad. I will say the first hour is, like, legitimately really good stuff. Or, at least legitimately good stuff. It's interesting, it's watchable, I was into it. Then for about 5 to 10 minutes, it really takes a major fucking nosedive. Thankfully, the film corrects itself pretty quickly. Some people will probably have a problem with the last act. I honestly kind of have a problem with the last act, but simultaneously, it's not too bad or distracting or movie ruining. I still think for the most part, this movie is, pretty consistent in terms of attention grabbing and I don't want to say entertainment value necessarily, but a word similar to that. Either way, this movie is honestly far from being god awful, and in terms of disturbingness, it's no Salò, but it honestly isn't a bad beginner film if you're looking to get into extreme cinema. And this isn't a bad movie at all, if you're into extreme cinema. I would definitely say this is one to keep an eye out for. It's pretty damn interesting for the most part. As a whole, this movie isn't anything amazing. The plot's interesting and it's pretty damn uncomfortable at times. I will say this, it's nowhere near as bad as a lot of people are saying. It ain't a perfect movie, but honestly, it's good for what it is. I would say this is a kind of see it for yourself movie, before you really read any of the reviews and brush this off as, something you wouldn't be into. If you were, if this movie doesn't sound like you'd be into it, then don't fucking see it, honestly. But if you're into low-budget cinema, if you're into disturbing extreme cinema, if you're into Scott Schimmer's other films, specifically Found, I think is a very good example, because Found is a movie that has bad acting and everything, but people still seem to appreciate that one for the most part because it is pretty interesting and disturbing, and I think this film is very similar, although nowhere near as disturbing as Found, or Headless for that matter. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this, but Headless is actually a spun-off film from Found, because Found is a movie that exists as its own thing, and in that movie there is a fictional horror film, and Headless is that fictional horror film. I don't know why I felt the need to explain that suddenly, but either way. Keep in mind that when I rate movies, I rate them based off of how entertaining or interesting, informative, etc., I find the films to be. So, if I give a movie that is like god-awful a high rating, keep in mind it's probably because I found it to be very interesting or entertaining. For this film, in terms of quality alone, I would give this movie probably a 2.5 out of 5. That's like a solid 5 out of 10. This movie is not necessarily good, but I would not say it's bad in terms of quality of production, acting, and stuff like that. In terms of my overall rating, I would probably have to give this film a 7 out of 10. Maybe a 6.5, somewhere around there. It's not perfect, but it's very interesting. It kept my attention. I don't know if it'll be worth a rewatch. I think Found is worth rewatching, or Plank Face is worth rewatching, but it's definitely not nearly as bad as I've heard people say. That is really it. I think all I've got left to say now is that the director of this movie, Scott Schimmer, he's doing pretty good for himself right now. And yeah, for me, this is his third hit in a row. I still need to see Harvest Lake, which I do plan on watching eventually. But for now, it's been nothing but hits for him. Anyway, guys, that's it for this one. You guys lucked out. You got multiple reviews in a row. This is Biscuit Bill Horror Reviews, signing off. Peace.